ASA is a game which has been out for almost 2 years now, and since I did some benchmarks about a year ago, I wanted to see a year later, how does ASA run? I've got an RTX 3090 GPU, I've got the Ryzen 7 3800X CPU, not the newest, I know, and I've got 24 gigabytes of RAM. I know it's a weird figure, and I do have the game installed on a hard drive and not an SSD, but I just wanted to know, how does it run now? Does it run any better than a year ago? What's it like? And I want to know your thoughts down in the comments below. At the end of this video, what did you think of the performance? Personally, it's not the best. I won't spoil it for you, but I'm sure you already expected that. So getting into the benchmarks now, finally, I'm going to be running all of these tests at 1440p. And I'm going to start with the settings which I usually use, which is play at 1440p full screen. I usually have it capped to 60, but for today's video I'm going to have it capped to 120. I don't want it over that because then it introduces loads of screen tearing. Does not look good. You can see the utilization if it does go above that figure. We're using FSR frame generation, balanced DLSS, no VSync, and the graphics are as follows: a mixture of medium, high, and some epic, a little bit of the foliage movement there, and in the advanced settings the bubble multiplier pretty low. Usually I have it off, and they're the settings which I'm running with the moment. And obviously this has got frame generation on, so I will give this with frame generation off, and we're running this on extinction, a reasonably intensive map. I think aberration is a little bit more intensive, but I just wanted to give it a go on extinction. I think it's a good sort of general way to see how the game is running. And you can see we're getting 60s, which isn't great really when you think about it. 60s in all this foliage here in this underground area of the game. We're using about 90 to 93% of the GPU, not fully, so we are a little bit CPU bound. If I had a slightly faster CPU in this system, it would do a little bit better. And we're getting screen tearing anyway, which is lovely, so my plan to avoid that has not been successful. But you can see on the settings I usually run it, I'm getting about 60 frames per second. So now I just want to go through all of the presets. I'm going to set this to performance only, give it a save, and hopefully my game decides not to crash, because Survival Ascended is certainly a game full of bugs and it may crash with big settings changes like this, or not. Right, the game definitely decided not to crash, and now you can see we're hitting that 120 FPS cap, and the GPU is at about 70 to 80%, so we could probably see about 130, 140 FPS on those max settings. And obviously the game looks way worse right now, and we're actually getting reasonable FPS. I realized I didn't tell you what the frame rate is of my ideal settings without frame generation. I'm just going to turn frame generation off on these settings and see what the raw frame horsepower is, and it's about that 70 FPS. I now have way less input lag. You can't tell through the video, so the FPS figure's a lot lower now, of course, and we are definitely CPU bound. So the thing that I could certainly do to upgrade this a little bit and to get the most power out of a 3090 would be to maximize my CPU performance by getting a new CPU. This CPU is a little bit old these days anyway, not the best for gaming. It hasn't got any 3D cache, but you can see on the lowest settings at 1440p, and resolution really does not make a big difference when it comes to frame rate in this game, by the way. We're getting only about 70 FPS in this area, which is insane. And obviously when I turn it back on, it will go up to like the frame rate cap, which I've set. We still have DLSS on, by the way. This is not native DLSS. So if I can I just do, yeah, Unreal 100%. Yes, it says it will be unstable. That's fine. I can cope with that. So at native resolution with frame generation, I did put frame generation on, didn't I? I did not put frame generation on. With frame generation on, we see those 100 FPS figures without DLSS. So DLSS actually makes a sizable difference. And if we turn off frame generation here, then you can see the game is running in those 70 FPS figures again, which really isn't that great when you think about it, looking at a 3090's performance and how it's running this so badly on the low settings. But I think it's time to go to low settings. So just in the preset here, we'll just go to the low settings preset and I'll look. At that, the game has crashed. So I will just close that without sending and boot the game back up. Right, so now after the game decided to crash and come back, I've got it on the low settings preset. You can see this looks a lot better than the very low settings preset, and we have it on 75% resolution scale. No, we're going to do 100% resolution, no frame gen or anything to speak of. You can see the very low preset doesn't perform all too much better. Now we're sitting around, you know, mid 50s to 60, occasionally touching the 70s. If we look up, no more FPS gain there. If anything, we lose frame rate, and you can see the performance is not great on low settings either. It definitely will boost if we chuck DLSS. I think let's do DLSS balance. It says it will become unstable once I add the DLSS, but generally it's fine. It doesn't tend to add a lot of FPS. Now you can see we're getting high 60s, mid 70s on balanced DLSS. At 1440p in this game, balanced DLSS looks pretty good. I did visor over quality for the extra performance gains. I think I put balanced, didn't I? Yeah. And I'll chuck frame generation on it as well. It says it will become unstable, but it will do the same performance boosting, or at least it should do the same performance boosting. I might restart the game real quick. So I have just given it a quick restart. You can see everything just needs to load in there for a second, and yeah, with that frame gen and some DLSS, you can see now we're getting 119. We're reaching that frame rate cap limit on the low settings, which is good. It's what it should be. I'm now just going to do the same, but bump the graphics up to medium. The only reason why it said custom there was because I changed the DLSS settings, not because I changed any of the other settings around. If the game's going to let me do stuff, it's always really slow applying settings. There we go. We've got 1440p DLSS balance. I'm going to leave it on DLSS balance. I don't even think it's worth talking about how it runs natively, because natively without frame generation it really does not run good. So just do take into account that all of this is not native. It is DLSS balanced, and we have frame generation on as well, boosting the frames up a little bit. You can see we are 100% GPU utilized here, so we are not CPU bound whatsoever. This is as good as 3090 is going to get us, and it's getting us 80 FPS. You can see the medium settings really bump things up from the low settings. It's self-explanatory, but you can see a lot of the artifacting of frame gen. Now that probably doesn't come across very well on the video. The game certainly does look a lot better though, and we're still getting 70 to 80 frames per second. So let's bump this game up to high settings, and we might get a little bit of a different story with the FPS. I'm probably expecting right around 60 FPS, so probably about 20 FPS lower, I think. So we got the high settings applied now, and yeah, what I thought, about 70, 60 FPS. We can see the game looks even better again. I'm still tired. I'm just going to enable God mode because I can't be bothered to have actual stamina. Hopefully that applied. I don't think it did apply. Let's God. Oh, I need to set God mode. I can't do commands in, so I wasn't. There we go. That might have also not done anything. I think it's done nothing. Let's forget about the God mode and just look at the performance. We're getting sort of mid 60s, high 60s into the 70s. Not too bad, especially for how this game visually looks, and we're only testing it in this one little area here. In other areas of the map, it may well run worse, but there's a lot of foliage here, and it's sort of like general gameplay wise what you're going to get. Obviously the game looks way better than what it looked like on low settings or the performance only settings, so I think it's definitely time now to have a look at the epic settings and see what we're getting with those. Recommended for a 4070 and up, so it's not recommended for this system at all. Hopefully my game does not crash when this applies, and indeed the game did not crash. We'll just give it a second to load things in. There we go. I'm not expecting high FPS. We're getting about 60 FPS with the massive amounts of screen tearing. My god, does it look ugly. And the game really does not look a whole lot better than high settings, really. It is running worse. It's fully utilizing that GPU, and I am dehydrated, so I probably should go run down and get a little bit of water. But I would say that the game runs all right on epic settings, provided you have the frame generation on and things like that. Tell me if we did not have the frame generation on. I know I've tested it before, we'd be getting probably about 30-40 FPS, and I can feel it in the input latency. The latency there that it gives you, 30 milliseconds is more representative of it. The sort of 46 there, you can see when it spikes, that's when it picks up on it when I start moving the mouse, and it can feel that latency. We're getting about 30 milliseconds of latency, and 33, 31 odd is about the 30 FPS mark. So I can tell, especially when it spikes to 40, that we're getting even lower than 30 FPS at points if the frame generation wasn't on, based on the latency. So let me just put it to my recommended settings, or the settings that I usually play it on, and then I'll tell you why I've chosen those and how it may boost your ASA performance a little bit. Now, when I'm running the game, you can see we're back to those 80, 90 FPS figures that I was at the start of the video, and I can feel that my latency is a lot lower now than it was before. The game feels a lot less heavy under the mouse. The input latency is much better, and the game, I think, you can't really tell a difference from this to Epic. Perhaps the shadows aren't, the shadows and the lighting aren't quite as good. Perhaps I should probably put the shadows up another level to really match it, so that quality isn't quite the same, but I still think the game looks enjoyable like this. I am going to turn those shadows up to high though, if you're wondering what settings doing that. It's in video graphics, general shadows, I've got them on medium. Probably chuck them on high. It's going to hurt the performance. Generally, shadows and view distance are the things, that makes the game look a lot better. And we're getting about 10 FPS less. I'd say these are actually my recommended settings, visuals wise, for this GPU at least. It's for the 3090. It's a high-end card, so I'm not running it on low settings, but I certainly would not crank this thing to Epic. But I don't think anyone should ever really crank their games to Epic unless it's a really old game that doesn't really matter. And I could potentially be getting a little bit more FPS if I wasn't recording this through OBS. I am losing probably about 5% of my performance, and you can still see we're getting good, clean performance. I will show you the raw figures for this, but I do just want to give you a quick settings guide for Ark Survival Sim if you're wondering about the performance and you want to get a little bit more out of it. Now, if you don't have an NVIDIA card that's 20 series or up in terms of RTX, you can't use any of this DLSS stuff, but you can select FSR and you can select whatever. I tend to think FSR isn't quite as good as DLSS visually, so I would not go performance, ultra performance, quality, or balanced. I'd say balanced is the lowest that I go. For DLSS, I could go down to performance and it would look alright. Frame generation, there's only FSR. They did used to have video frame generation, they don't anymore. That is the biggest thing for boosting your performance. But if you do feel a lot of extra input lag and input latency, especially if you're already running initially low frame rate, that is why. But it can make the game a little bit more playable, especially if you're using a controller. You don't feel that input lag quite as much. It's not great. I'd say never put your view distance on Epic. It absolutely tanks the performance, so high or medium depending on where you want it. Advanced graphics as well, high or medium, doesn't make much difference. Textures, it all depends on how much of VRAM you've got in your GPU. I've got 24 gigs. I do not have my VRAM utilization, but this GPU will probably be using a decent amount of it. I'd say if you've got more than 10 gigs of VRAM, you could probably chuck that up to Epic and be fine. Otherwise, if you're not sure, put it on high and not Epic. Reflections on the water, I don't think matter that much. I always put them on medium. Post-processing is a very important setting for visuals, high or Epic if you want those sort of better visuals. General shadows, again, you saw the difference between medium and high. I'm definitely going to be keeping those on high. Illumination, this is the most important part visually, I think, for the game. The shadows and the illumination, you could have everything else on like basically low. Maybe put the textures up a little bit higher and have these on high and Epic, and that would make a great deal of difference. Effects and foliage don't actually make all too much difference. These are GPU killers. I have them really low actually anyway. I need to put that back. There we go. It's a little bit better. I always have these low because they are just absolute GPU killers in terms of the settings options, so I wouldn't recommend you have them particularly high, and my game almost just froze because of that. wonderful. And in the advanced graphics tabs, if it lets me go through, again, adjusting the foliage, shows how intensive it is. I'm gonna wait like 30 seconds for my game to start responding again. There we go. Got multiplier, I've got it like that. All of this, always keep that on epic. I wouldn't put that any lower because that's just easily achievable speeds. Always put blood on and things like that, the general stuff. I personally think these are good settings for this GPU, and I've got bloom and shafts and low light enhancement and all that stuff on. I just have HLOD off and cinematic lighting mode off. I don't think you should be using that. It's not worth using it. This game already looks cinematic enough and also runs poorly enough, so I don't think you should be using that. I will say though, I would recommend you put a frame rate cap on to whatever your monitor's refresh rate is at least, and I'm going to chuck VSync on as well. It hasn't got rid of the screen tearing because I've got a mix and match of VSyncs between NVIDIA and my NVIDIA control panel and the game. This has introduced a lot more input latency though, as now our frame rate is only 60 FPS, and I can definitely feel that in the game, but it does make it a lot smoother and stutter less. I am getting a significant amount more input latency though, which isn't great. You can see though GPU utilization is down to like 80% now, and also the GPU temperature is a little bit lower and it's using less power, which I think is pretty neat and pretty good. And also, if I've got it set up properly, then we don't get screen tearing as well. We are getting significantly less to no screen tearing though because of that now. But I would say, if you want to maximize the visuals and minimize the sort of performance you're using, I'm just going to put FSR on balance. So we'll restart my game, by the way. FSR on balance. I'm going to leave it on 1440p just for this GPU, and I'd say that you can chuck advanced graphics down to I could say let's just put everything on low. Textures I'll leave on epic. Reflections can go to low. Post-processing is a very important one, so I will leave that on high. General shadows on high and global illumination on high. Effects on low and foliage on low. And I'll restart my game and also put these down to 0 as well, because they are GPU performance killers. And on top of that, I am going to unlock the frame rate and I'll restart the game and let's see how good it runs. So this is the visual quality that you get with those settings. You can see, yeah, while the foliage perhaps doesn't look the best, it looks a little bit lower quality. The lighting is still superb. The shadows are still superb. We don't have the most insane performance right now, but we are not GPU bound, we are CPU bound, so you could squeeze another 10% out of it, which means we should be getting about 100 FPS ish if I had a better CPU. It is certainly less intensive, and my CPU is only being utilized 50-60%. Personally, I think these are great settings to run if you want to just play the game and still have it look good, but also have a little bit more performance in the tank as well. Of course, if you really need it, you've got the low performance anyway, the performance only modes where you're only prioritizing that performance. But you can see the game still looks pretty good. Yeah, we don't have any of the sort of extra water physics and things, and we don't have any of the decals, but the game still looks pretty good. It looks a lot better than those lower settings, and I think it's all right on this. But to show that this is still running at like 80 odd FPS, and most of the settings right now are set to low or medium, with only a few being high, and textures being epic because of the VRAM, of course, and this game being at 1440p with frame generation and upscaling, so it's not even running at native. It's insane that this game actually still runs this poorly, and it's been out for 2 years already. So it is a shame that ASA really does not run particularly good. While I'm lucky that I can run it myself on my own machine, I do feel really bad for all the other people that can't run it on their machines, and that is a shame in my opinion. And I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I hope that you found it informative, and that ASA still runs terribly and it still crashes as well, as we got a crash in this video. I'll see you guys all in the next one though. Bye. And give it up for our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, Dominic Maciejewski, sorry about that name, and everyone else that's on this list. All the people I've mentioned are paid members, and if you feel like that's something you want a shout out at the end of the video, go join the Patreon or become a paid YouTube member.